I am so excited to finally be able to do a thorough review of this weapon, because this is the kind of creativity and power fantasy that I want Fat Shark to give us more of. Hello Varlets, welcome to another weapon review in a long time. Today we'll be taking a deep dive and learning about everything there is to know about the Shock Maul and Suppression Shield for the Arbitrator class. By the end of this video, you should have a solid idea on how best to tailor this weapon to your needs. So let's get it on. We're going to start by taking a look at its damage profiles. Now, I won't go through every single attack patterns profile, so I'm going to use one attack as an example and call out the important things that need attention too. So using this profile, you can see that it does reasonable damage numbers with higher than average carapace damage. This makes it feel good to use against crushers and maulers, which is a breath of fresh air relative to most other weapons. It has standard finesse multipliers across the board, nothing specific or interesting to call out here. The shield bash attacks, however, do have below than average finesse multipliers. This is because they have a much higher stagger number, which is capable of knocking maulers and crushers out of their overhead attacks, and this is a very strong trait to have for a melee weapon. Speaking of stagger, this weapon intrinsically applies an electrocute debuff on enemies that it does stagger. On its own, this doesn't really do anything, but it can interact with certain blessings. Overall, the damage profile numbers between the marks are very similar, only minor differences between light and heavy attacks. What matters most is the moveset. While both weapons do similar damage, their movesets split them apart. The Mark 6 has a more single target focused light chain with many strike down attacks and an added shield punch to boot. This makes its light combo very strong for dealing with dangerous enemies since you can stagger them during your chain. The heavy chain is a loop that cycles between a shield bash and an overhead strike down, making it a decently strong and safe combo for pummeling enemies into the dirt. Its push attack is a horizontal cleave, making it suited for creating space while battling hordes. The key combos that I often use for this mark are the heavy 1 and light 1 loop for crowd clear. This offers you a lot of crowd control and cleave. The heavy 1 into light 2, 3, 4 and 1 for single target damage bursts, which includes a shield bash. This is my primary way of dealing with crushers because I can first knock them out of their heavy attack and then pummel them with a rapid succession of light attacks to the head. You can also create space with a push attack into a light 2 and heavy 1 loop. I usually resort to this when I've forgotten where in my chain I am and I want to get back into using my heavy 1 and light 1 loop. The Mark 11, on the other hand, has almost two different gears in its light chain. The first two attacks are relentless horizontal cleaves, great for horde clear. But the following two attacks are vertical strike down attacks, designed for single target damage and come one after another in rapid succession. Unlike the Mark 6, the light chain of the Mark 11 lacks a shield bash, giving you a little less safety when pummeling a crusher or a mauler. But it does have a respectable stagger on its vertical strike down attacks, just not as strong as a shield bash. Its heavy chain is similar to the 6, but it has an additional opening relentless horizontal cleave. After this attack, the heavy 2 and heavy 3 loop, dealing a continuous shield bash and overhead strike similar to the 6, but has a slightly stronger damage profile. Its push attack is an uppercut that is more suited for knocking out single targets that get in the way. The key combos that I use for the Mark 11 are the heavy 1 light 1 loop for crowd clear. This is very similar to the heavy 1 light 1 with the 6. I also use the light 1 and 2 block cancel. This gives you quick cleaves and decent CC while weaving in a block to maybe sometimes activate certain block blessings. The heavy 1 and 2 into light 3-4 for quick anti-armor is a very good way to dispatch of crushers. I find this more quicker to execute than doing a heavy chain. And finally, your push attack chains into a light 3 for a quick light 3-4 single target. Overall, I prefer the Mark 6 myself because the light combo feels great to use and I really like the extra shield bash it has as part of its attack chain. But ultimately, my best advice is to use both of them. Bring them both into a handful of games and see which one suits you better. You might like the uppercut and downward smash of the Mark 11 more, so play around and find out. Next, we are going to talk about weapon stats, specifically the debate around whether defense or power output should be the dumb stat. Now, before I get further into this topic, I want to give a shout out to Royal Blood for doing the groundwork and testing. My work here builds upon the findings that he has made, so anything I do here is just more detail added and my own testing included. I'm going to show you a comparison table between defense and power output to show you the different marginal gains you get from having either 60% or 80% for each of the stats. For power output, the difference between 60 and 80% is ultimately 1.75 meters of extra range for your flashbang, and a slightly wider arc to boot. You can check out Royal Blood's video to see the radius of the arc and how minute the difference it makes. For the defense stat, it also offers really tiny gains as well. Our dodge count doesn't actually change between 60 and 80% because it rounds up to the nearest whole number. Sprint cost is only a 5% difference, which honestly in the long term doesn't make that much of a difference either. Dodge distance is functionally unchanged. The only thing that does matter is push costs. The difference between 60 and 80% is a 22% cost difference. Now, this on its own would have been okay or significant enough to warrant it over power output, but what is crucial is that there is a hidden block cost stat that isn't mentioned here. In Royal Blood's video, he shows the difference between a 0%, a 60%, and an 80% defense stat when it comes to blocking a Crusher overhit. While 0% broke his guard, 60% and 80% could block it with higher values retaining more stamina. So I decided to run this test myself under baseline conditions, and my results are a little different from Royal Blood's. At 60%, with no other talents, perks, or blessings, a Crusher overhit could break my guard, while at 80%, I was left with 20% stamina. So I had around 10% less stamina overall than what Royal Blood showed in his videos. And while I'm uncertain whether he did have any talents, blessings, or perks active in his tests, in mine, the evidence is clear. Having a max defense stat can stop a Crusher overhit from breaking your guard, and this alone is enough reason for you to take it over the tiny range increase of the power output. If you compound this with talents like Retaliatory Force, block cost efficiency on your Curios, and suddenly you can afford to tank a couple of overhits from Crushers no problem, much less be afraid of attacks from Maulers and Ragers. So, my final verdict from my testing and building upon Royal Blood's work, dump power output for defense. It may literally save your life to do so. Next, let's talk about the interesting thing about this weapon, the flashbang. This is one of the most unique special activations added to the game, and I really love using it. This special activation alone pushes the weapon up to my top 5 favorite weapons easily. So, let's get into the mechanics of the flashbang. On your shield, there is an indicator on the top right to show you how much power has accumulated in the shield. Once you reach at least 50% power, you have access to 1 flashbang charge available. You get the next charge only when you have reached 100% power, meaning you can hold up to 2 flashbang charges at any given time. You naturally accumulate power over time, and if you did nothing at all, it would take about 35 seconds to get up to the first 50%, and about 1 minute and 10 seconds to get to 100%. So there's a built-in about 35-second cooldown in between charges. You can also accumulate power from blocking attacks. From my tests, the damage of the attack didn't really matter, only the number of hits did. This means it's much more effective to block and tank shooters, gunners, and especially shotgunners to build up charge. Blocking overhead attacks from Crushers and Maulers didn't really do that much when it came to generating charge, so for this reason, block cost efficiency works very well, allowing you to tank for longer and farm a lot more charge as you push into gunners. When you activate the flashbang, you raise up your shield in a blocking state and unleash a cone-shaped stagger that reaches up to 20 meters away depending on your power output level. If you have 60%, then it would just reach over 18 meters. Note that you can use the flashbang while blocking and it will not lower your guard, so you can use this while tanking shots at the same time and then flashbang the enemies while you're protecting yourself. This flashbang briefly stuns enemies affected for a moment and can even stop Crushers and Mauler overheads, Rager combos, and allows you to open up bulwarks as well. The amount of utility the flashbang brings to the table is just incredible. Ranged enemies will also stop shooting after being stunned, and after that, they will be momentarily suppressed, cowering on the ground or being afraid for maybe a second or two. Smart use of the flashbang can provide some breathing room for you and your team if you're being overwhelmed. But in addition to being an incredibly powerful defensive tool, you can actually use this to prime yourself for a stronger offensive. When activated, the flashbang unleashes a 0 damage stagger in a cone. Enemies affected by it are considered hit by your attack. This means on-hit talents can be activated as well. This includes Justified Measures and Forceful along with its supporting nodes. Because of that, you can instantly bring yourself to a fully buffed state from 0 with a flashbang if there are enough enemies around. This means you can buff yourself with 15% damage, 25% damage resistance, 50% more impact, 50% more cleave, 10% more attack speed, stun immunity, and replenish 5% toughness per second, all from opening an assault with a flashbang. Big deal, it's not like these talents are difficult to activate in the first place. I can hear you say, And you're right, they aren't, but there's more. Remember that the flashbang is a 0 damage stagger. That means enemies hit are now affected by Breaking Descent's 10% extra damage. That being said, the window for you to do anything during the time that they are staggered is very small. You only have around maybe 2 seconds or so to react, which is not much time to do anything meaningful, unless you have the Arbites impact grenades. You see, the moment you flashbang enemies, you're actually getting a strong damage booster. If you have justified measures, which practically every Arbites build has, and Breaking Descent, which again most Arbites builds will have as well, you can potentially get up to a 25% damage swing. That's an entire tier 4 perk from nothing, and it can make the difference to breakpoints. Take these rages for example. With my build right now, I'm dealing 1,651 damage to them, which is a mix of the impact grenade's base damage of 1,500 and 10% from Lone Wolf. They are still alive, clearly. Now, if I flashbang them first to activate both justified measures and get the damage increase from Breaking Descent, and then throw an impact grenade, they die. So, while this isn't the most impactful interaction, pun intended, it's just another layer of interesting things that the Suppression Shield brings to the table and why I love it so much. This allows you to push the breakpoints for enemies that are much more tankier, especially in the higher levels of Havoc where elites have more health. Finally, let's talk about perks and blessings. There are several ways to build this weapon, which depends on the build you're going for and the intention you have behind it. Perk-wise, I personally like to take Carapace to leverage on the fact that I can straight up bully Crushers and Maulers with ease. This also allows me to man up better against the twins in Havoc since I'm not at all afraid of their assault. The other perk will depend on your loadout and the weapon you are pairing with it. If you don't already have an anti-monster weapon, taking unyielding damage can help a lot, since you do a respectable amount of unyielding damage already. This also makes taking down bulwarks a little easier, since you have multiple ways of opening them up. Maniac damage would be the next choice to pick, because pummeling Drake Rages, which is arguably the more dangerous of the two types, is what this weapon excels at. Between your flashbang and shield bashes, Rages should never pose a threat as long as you are the first thing they crash into. I don't think Flak is really necessary since your damage numbers against them are already pretty decent to start with. I find it more useful to gear up against other problems like Mauler and Crusher walls. As for blessings, because the Maul and Shield has powerful staggering strikes, the really good anchor blessing to have is High Voltage. You will almost always practically be able to activate this blessing no matter what you are smacking, given your shield bashers and staggering strikes. So for most games, this is essentially free 25% damage. After that, it depends on what role you're trying to fulfill. If you want to be an impossible wall to bring down, you could take Hammer Blow to send enemies flying every which way, creating lots of breathing room for your backline to operate with. You can also take Confident Strike if you want to be the spearhead that draws aggro first, and can easily sustain themselves from chip damage and gunfire. I would say that Confident Strike is the meta choice because of how strong it is when combined with the rest of the Arbites kit. If you want to make armor a joke, I can wholeheartedly recommend taking Opportunist for that additional 25% rending. If you look at your damage profile again, you'll notice that we aren't too far from outright ignoring the armor damage modifiers from Carapace. The additional 25% rending is fully utilized on the Maul and Shield against Carapace because you have a very consistent way of staggering enemies as well. As for the rest of the blocking blessings, I want to commend Fat Shark for trying to make a more diverse pool of blessings. But as they are right now, it's hard to recommend them over more impactful blessings that have a more meaningful and natural activation condition. I have much to say about the current state of blessings and the game in general really, but that's for a different video. So, with that, we've come to the end of this weapon review. Just to recap what we've learned, we took a look at the damage profile and the movesets of both the different marks of the Maul and Shield. We explored in greater detail why the defense stat is the superior stat compared to power output. We thoroughly explored the mechanics and the clever use of the unique flashbang. And finally, we took a look at the perk and blessing combinations that, in my opinion, best complement the weapon given its use cases. As mentioned, this is easily one of my top 5 favorite melee weapons that I've ever used because of how much more interesting it makes my games. I'm not sure what this score denotes yet, and this is something I'll think about at a later time, but I give the Shock Maul and Suppression Shield a fantastic 9 out of 10, whatever that means. Tier list maybe. So, go forth and enjoy shield bashing enemies and tanking shots. You are the wall the darkness breaks against. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.